Good to see you, Ambassador.
Great to see you.
Many years of this painful episode in our history, but that I would say to our Gold Star families that are here and to every veteran who sacrificed, we kept America safe for over 2 decades, and we can't lose sight of that. That we did not have another 9/11. We did not have additional attacks on our homeland, despite many issues in this war that we absolutely should learn from. So we've heard continuously, both in the media, from colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and from President Biden, that he was stuck with the Doha Agreement. That this was his hands were tied. The Trump administration tied his hands. He had no choice. And I just want to put out, Mr. Chairman, one thing for the record here. This is a short list of the policies that the Biden administration walked away from on day one. Everything from the construction of the border wall, our membership in the World Health Organization. The Biden administration completely walked away from Trump's maximum pressure campaign, tried to get us back into a disastrous Iran nuclear deal, rejoined the Paris Climate Accord, ended Remain in Mexico, canceled a Keystone pipeline, $16 billion in investment, and I could go on. All of these things were reversed on the first month, but yet we're supposed to believe that somehow he was handcuffed to this deal. Mr. Ambassador, let's go back to January of 2021. President Trump's still in office. His advisors go in, tell him, Mr. President, the Taliban haven't lived up to the half-dozen conditions that were in the deal, minus one, partially not attacking troops, but in terms of entering negotiations with the Afghan government and other conditions. The Taliban didn't live up to the deal. What did President Trump do, Mr. Ambassador, as a result of that advice? Well, he had a stated goal of getting all U.S. troops out.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But now he's told he didn't live up to the deal. What did President Trump do?
Well, it'd be speculation, of course.
Well, no, but it's not speculation that by January 19th, 2021, we still had Bagram Air Base.
We did.
Did we?
Yes, we did.
Is that the only air base in the world that is sandwiched between China, Russia, Iran, and is a key platform for counterterrorism?
Right.
Did we still have Bagram Air Base?
We did.
Did we still have 2,500 U.S. special operators and intelligence professionals?
We did.
Did we still have 5,000 to 7,000 NATO troops?
We did.
Did we still have over 10,000 contractors that were keeping the Afghan Air Force flying? And all of our intelligence assets, and plus, the most important thing, the message to the Afghan people and government that we stand with you, right? So let's fast forward. Just a few months later, did President Biden reject your advice for conditionality moving forward on the Doha Agreement?
He decided not to make a withdrawal of the final 2,500 conditional on a political agreement or leaving a counterterrorism force behind. He
essentially said, well, he didn't essentially. He said to the world, we're pulling out. He was asked are there conditions. He said, unconditionally, we're out, regardless of the consequences. Correct?
Because, and when I have to say that, he thought if he stayed, he might have to go back to war, likely to go back to war with the Taliban.
But but this is the misnomer. This is the false choice. Yes. We could take an approach like we did in, say, Colombia for 40 years, where we had trainers, we had assets, we had support, but we didn't put American troops in harm's way. There was a lot of middle ground between unconditional full withdrawal and going back to any type of surge or war.
True.
Correct?
True, correct.
But those options weren't considered. And I'll just ask you this. We have had the senior leader of al-Qaeda, Zawahiri, as a guest of the Taliban. We now have reports of 8 al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan. We have reports from the UN of tens of thousands of fighters, foreign fighters flowing into Afghanistan, plus the ongoing threat of ISIS. Isn't the American homeland today safer than it was 3 years ago?
Well, I would respectfully ask you to ask the intelligence community, ours, to look at the data that the UN reports I wouldn't rely, in other words, on the UN report.
Okay, let me ask you, Chairman, if I could indulge you. I think we're at the end here.
Please.
Does Al-Qaeda and ISIS still have the intent to attack the United States and the West if given the opportunity to do so?
Well, no doubt, but I also want to point that...
So that's a yes. I mean, just for the record, that's a yes, they fully intend.
That they have the intent. But I also want to say, Congressman, that our intelligence committee, from what I read in the unclassified version, since we can't discuss classified material here, believe that in the next year or two, if Al-Qaeda does not have the ability to attack the United States, I may be paraphrasing, from Afghanistan, the likelihood would be...
The commander of Central Command a year ago testified that ISIS will have reconstituted their capability to attack the West within 6 months, and that was a year ago from Afghanistan.
Yes,
Mr. Ambassador.
He did say, but I noticed, again, the intelligence community since then, in the last few months, has highlighted successes by the Taliban against Daesh, against ISIS-K. I would respectfully suggest that for coming to a judgment on those, that you
I'm on the Intelligence Committee, and I would just state for the record, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence, relying on terrorists like the Taliban and Al-Qaeda to take out terrorists is a fool's errand and danger and very dangerous.
We
for
shouldn't
them.
rely.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Khalilzad, thank you for coming back before our committee. And in 2021, the last time you were before this committee, before the withdrawal, I asked you if President Ghani and Chairman Abdullah had any predictions about the outcome of a planned U.S. withdrawal in Afghanistan, having met both gentlemen when I visited Afghanistan in 2015. And your response was, quote, "They have no choice but to prepare to defend themselves, and we have made a commitment to help them defend themselves if the Talibs go the route of a military solution." Ambassador Khalilzad, did the United States stick to our commitment to help the Afghan government when the Taliban took a military solution in Afghanistan?
Well, we did, I believe, in the following way, if I understand you, sir, which is that we continued to provide them with military support, including attacks against the Talibs when the Talibs attacked them. But once the government had disintegrated with the departure of President Ghani, then, of course, we could not help them. I think
just reclaiming my time, as I think Mr. Waltz demonstrated so ably, we did not stick to our commitments, and there was not a fulfillment of the Doha conditions-based withdrawal. It was an unconditional withdrawal. And so from that standpoint, I don't think that the United States stuck to our commitment to help the Afghan government when the Taliban was clearly making progress throughout the country. Do I interpret your testimony in response to Mr. Waltz correctly that President Biden did not adhere to a conditions-based withdrawal as contemplated by the Doha Agreement?
No. The Doha Agreement, the conditions were, one, that there would be no attacks on the U.S. withdrawing forces, that we could come to the assistance of the Afghan government, that there would be inter-Afghan negotiations, and that there would be no allowing of terrorists. But whether to make withdrawal conditional on a ceasefire, that they had two Afghan sides don't fight each other, and to that there be a political agreement. Those were not explicit
Yeah,
conditions.
well, this was clearly an abandonment of the conditions-based approach.
yeah, but the
in
agreement
Doha.
was condition-based. But which conditions? That's what I mean.
I hear you.
Right.
It was an unconditional retreat, the way I see it. In 2021, also before the withdrawal, I asked you whether it would be a strategic mistake to abandon Bagram, and I'm paraphrasing you, but you basically referred me to the Defense Department
Right.
on that question. Ambassador, the withdrawal from Afghanistan gave up U.S. control of the only U.S. air base in the country that shares a land border with China.
Right.
Can you give us a readout on what the status is of Bagram? Who is in control of it now, and have you seen any Chinese interest in that base?
Yeah. Now, of course, you're right that we gave up, obviously, Bagram, and that was as part of the agreement to withdraw all forces. But as far as what's happening there now, I'm not in a good position. You should ask the intel community to brief you. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Chinese were interested in it. But I have no data or a fact to give you on
Have
that.
you seen any increase in Chinese investment in Afghanistan since the United States left?
There are indications, clearly, from what I read in the media, of Chinese interest in Afghanistan and activities, yes.
In my remaining time, Ambassador, it's often portrayed that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was a security decision for the long-term safety of American soldiers. While I do not believe the United States should have had a forever presence in Afghanistan, save for maybe Bagram, the way in which we withdrew was an unmitigated disaster. Do you believe the United States is more or less safe with the Taliban in charge?
I believe that the withdrawal was because of the costs and a perception that we weren't succeeding, that was costing too much, the world had changed, and we needed to adjust. But certainly, in terms of terrorism, it would have, being there gave us certain advantages, being in Afghanistan, rather than not being in Afghanistan.
My time has expired, but with ISIS-K fighters, Al-Qaeda allowed to thrive in Afghanistan, the Taliban in charge, clearly the United States is not in a safer posture. With that, my time has expired. Mr. Chairman, thanks for the hearing. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Mr. Amo.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Ambassador Khalilzad. Pleasure to see you. I wanted to understand a portion of your opening testimony. You said that, quote, the first phase of the withdrawal lasted 135 days in which U.S. forces were reduced to 8,600.
Right.
By the time President Trump left office, U.S. forces in Afghanistan had been reduced to 2,500. So let's fill in the gaps a little bit on what happened between the levels of 8,600 to 2,500.
Right.
So that reduction to 8,600, which you said occurred initially, that was ordered by President Trump, is that the case?
That is the case.
And it was an explicit condition of the Doha deal that the United States was on the hook to do that level of withdrawal after the signing of the agreement in 2020.
The only one that was specified in terms of a phase was phase one, to come to 8,600. It didn't get into subsequent phases, except that the final withdrawal of the remaining forces would be by May 1st or so, in 14 months, in other words. But there was no other phases like to go to 4,500 to 2,500. That was not specified in the agreement.
Okay, and it had occurred per the terms of the deal within 135 days
Phase
of
one.
signing. Phase
Yes.
one. Okay.
And we had felt the military advice was, I should ask them, that we could do the mission with the 8,600, so that the risk was not going to be higher in any significant degree in terms of our ability to carry out the mission still at the 8,600.
Got it. Understood. And so so you said that was in phase one, so there were no stipulations of further
Subsequent phases.
None
yes.
of those. Okay. And do you recall any troop reduction directed by President Trump in September to
There was a
4,500?
phase of coming, I believe, I will need to check, but my recollection is it went to another phase of 500 and then to 2,500.
And was that at the discretion of President Trump?
The military offering options and the president deciding.
Okay. And did you understand that the drawdown in 2020, was that to be tied to any Taliban progress on meeting its own commitments in the Doha
Yes,
deal?
well, in that regard, yes, I would say. And that was their commitments, especially on the counterterrorism part. The relationship between counterterrorism commitment and withdrawal was very tight. The commitment on the Afghan reconciliation was not as tight. It was linked, but not as tight. We definitely was tight on start of inter-Afghan negotiations, but not on success, an agreement being in place before departure, complete departure.
Okay. And do you recall a tweet by President Trump in October 2020 pledging to have the small remaining number of our brave men and women serving in Afghanistan home by Christmas? Do you remember that tweet?
Well, there was the idea that was floated. I don't remember the specific tweet to get everybody home by Christmas. Yes, I remember speeches and statements.
But if you saw that, that'd be something that would surprise you.
I would not surprise me, no.
Okay. Okay. And according to the terms of the Doha Agreement, the United States would not fully withdraw all troops until May 2021. So
Right.
did that seem realistic given the actions of the Taliban?
Well, I mean, that was not called for in the agreement, and the agreement had until May, and then it had also conditionality, which is that our commitment, delivering on them, dependent on them delivering on their commitments.
Would removing all those troops have impacted your leverage to secure Afghan peace talks?
Well, yeah, removing troops was the biggest leverage. So therefore, if we did not have the troops, the leverage during that period during which we would have had troops would not have been there.
Mm-hmm. And then do you recall another discretionary troop reduction by President Trump down to 2,500 in January 2021, just before the administration took office?
I'm not aware of that there was any other decision in January to get the 25 troops out before the change in administration. I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Well, I see my time has expired, so I yield to the chair.
Thank you.
Time has expired. Chair recognizes Mr. Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, getting the troops home for Christmas makes this particularly appropriate. In the back there's two Gold Star families,
Right.
Christy Shamblin and Elisa and Herman Lopez. Their loved ones didn't get home for Christmas.
Yes.
They didn't get home for Christmas because of a hasty withdrawal, because of a decision to withdraw from the military base and keep, as it turned out, a completely non-defendable, or at least not defended, embassy. So I want to go through a little bit of a timeline, because you have two administrations, and to a great extent were there for all of them. When Mike Pompeo left office, one of the agreements was a 50-50 sharing coming out of that negotiation between the Taliban and the lawfully elected government. Isn't that true?
The percentages were not mentioned, but it was to be negotiations for a new government between
With shared-
the Taliban.
with shared authority.
Shared government, yes.
Okay, so the
But-
shared authority, it's fair to say, started off at least tangentially as 50-50. And then as the Taliban continued to aggressively take bigger parts of the country, because we had withdrawn and to be honest, the Afghan government was not able to hold them back in that summer offensive. As I understand it, it went to 60-40 in favor of the Taliban, 70-30, and then ultimately 100-0 as they headed toward Kabul. Is that correct?
I don't know about the percentages. There was nothing formally
Well, was the Taliban demanding more authority as they took more land?
Oh, no doubt that as the balance shifted and the requirement and what one heard was that the increase. But I have to say again that on the 15th of August, they made a proposal for a shared government.
Okay, well, I mean, you previously testified to the 50-50, 60-40, and 70-30. These are your own prior statements. So I just want to, we'll give it to you from
Yes, please.
the transcribed interview.
That they have asked, they've changed their position, but I don't recall
Okay, well, let's just try to be
numbers.
Let's try to be fair with the facts as they occur.
Sure, absolutely.
There was a negotiation for an end to hostilities and a shared government power, in many ways similar to other ends of that. Yeah. We agreed to leave because they agreed not to fight. During perhaps the Trump administration, but certainly during the Biden administration, the Taliban was aggressively fighting. They were, in fact, taking territory. They were violating the spirit of the ceasefire, the spirit of the agreement, and yet we continued our withdrawal as though they were not, in fact, taking by force control of the country. Isn't that correct?
The agreement was, Congressman, for them not to attack withdrawing forces. The agreement was for us, if they attack the Afghans, to come to the defense of the Afghan forces.
But we didn't come to that. We did no. But let's be clear. What you're saying is we agreed that we wouldn't get killed as we withdrew, right. But we left the caveat that we would not allow the Taliban to defeat the Afghan military, and we had the right to come to their defense.
Right. And we did.
Well, we didn't do it sufficient to stop them, did we?
Well, at the end, you're right. But what surprised us was the poor performance of the Afghans, particularly post-President Biden's announcement and in the summer. The April announcement in the summer that the balance began to shift significantly.
So I just want to ask a simple question.
Yes, sir.
And it's a final question, I believe. When conditions changed and our ability to stop the Taliban by taking the country by force and putting children, particularly girls, back into essentially slavery, when that began to change, President Biden did not react by sending troops back in or anything else. And it's your testimony, he did so because sending troops back in other words, enforcing their keeping their agreement, would have potentially cost American lives, and he wasn't willing to do so. So 13 Americans died, and countless Americans and people who helped Americans became trapped in Afghanistan because he wouldn't send troops back in when, in fact, the Taliban was violating not just the spirit, but the facts of what they'd agreed to, which was not taking the country by force. Isn't that true?
Well, the government disintegrated. The president ran away.
Wait a second. The government disintegrated when all they had left was an encircled Kabul. The president flew out at a time.
If you go further in time.
Well, I'd like to go back to around January 20th of 2021.
Right.
On January 20th, 2021, what was, in fact, the government already disintegrated, or what did over the next 8 months, as they were finding themselves unable to hold the territories and negotiate, they began to disintegrating finally when they were entrapped and all that was left was an airport to leave by.
You're of course right that during the 8 months of disintegration increased, and finally in Kabul what happened. But I think that the balance shifted surprisingly. Our assessment was different than what happened.
I appreciate the surprise, but Mr. Chairman, I think the testimony speaks for itself. It was during the 8 months in which the Taliban aggressively took land that they began to deteriorate a government because we did not re-engage with troops sufficient And maybe that was a good decision, but
Right.
I don't think it was. I think it was the decision that made inevitable the people of Afghanistan living in slavery and 13 Americans losing their lives. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Understand we're waiting for Mr. Mills. Is that correct? Okay. Well, let me just say I want to thank you, sir, for being here today, again, voluntarily. I appreciate your honesty, transparency.
Thank you.
You were in a very difficult assignment, as I always told you.
Thank you.
Even back in the day. It's very helpful to this committee to get all the facts before us.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for your service to the nation as well. There may be additional questions that we would ask you to submit in writing.
Sure.
And pursuant to committee rules, all members have 5 days to submit questions, extraneous materials for the record, and without objection, this committee stands adjourned.